Hey everybody, Big Toad here, and today in this video we are going to begin looking at that big 6 foot by 3 foot painting of a Idaho Butte and foothills. Today I'm going to focus on putting in some sagebrush. I want to do one here in the foreground, and then I'm going to work on the background. First thing I want to talk about is the colors I'm using. I mixed for the trunk of the sagebrush. Obviously, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and I think I put in a little bit of Naples yellow to lighten it up just a smidgen. After I got that in, I'm now going to put in some of the dark colors for the interior of the sagebrush and the shaded side. Sagebrush can be very dark in spots and then very light in others. As you can see, the sagebrush is already in place there in front of it. So I've lightened up that trunk color a little bit, put in a little more blue and Naples yellow to bring it a little more in the green spectrum. And I'm using that to put some darks in. It's a very dark color. And I'm just using that number 6 round brush, and I'm rolling it in my paint and then just tapping it on its side to create the interior of the sagebrush. I want to focus on not making it look too round, so I'm putting in some little parts poking out. And now I'm coming back in with a lighter color. This is kind of a grayish green. Again, I'm using Naples yellow and cobalt blue to create this color, and then I'm leaning it more towards the gray side of things. Brought in a little bit of kind of a alizarin crimson to dull that out a little bit. I was carefully put it. I wanted to set behind that fence, so I'm careful not to overdo my go over the top of the barbed wire. So the method of creating these sagebrush is really very simple. The trick to it is to give them a random look to it. So you want to be careful not to make them just round. And also how you distribute the lighter colors to make sure you get a nice dark core to it, and dark, a little darker on the shady side. And so just being careful as I lay in the lighter colors and multiple shades of the color there. You can see it getting lighter along the edges there. All right, so let's talk about why I chose to put that sagebrush where I did. I felt like this side needed something to balance it out a little more. Also, I felt like it would be a great spot for the sagebrush in order to cover up part of that road in the midground there that's coming out. That road did disappear behind the hillside, and I thought, you know, if I had a sagebrush in front of it, it would give me more of a contrast between the foreground and the midground there, and make that road pop out a little better as it comes up out of that sagebrush. So it was strategic why I chose to put it there. And I think it fills out this side. I think I've got now enough in the foreground on that left side of the road there. I think that was a strategic place for it. And I think it worked out really well where it's at to really add something to the composition. And at this point, what I'm trying to do is add to the composition. I'm not trying to overwork what I've already done. I'm looking for opportunities. And as I've described before, I knew what the basis of my composition was. And, you know, but a 6x3 painting is a very large painting, very panoramic. And so you've got to be careful with this kind of landscape and how I'm going to keep it exciting throughout the entire painting. Or if exciting is not the word, how do I keep the viewer locked into the painting? and I just needed this sagebrush to add a little bit to that side. You see here I'm going back in and establishing some of the darker colors on that sagebrush where it got maybe a little light. And what's difficult to see here is in that dark areas, I'm adding just a little bit of purple. And you can make that purple out of either the Cobalt blue and Alizarin crimson, or the ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. You just have to see which one you like better. And also, I have a tube of a purple that I use it's just, I don't know, quicker sometimes. I like to have it. Sometimes I mix it. Sometimes I use it out of the tube. And so that purple adds something. And I have a lot of purple scattered throughout this painting in the shadows and the dark areas, and it kind of ties them all together. All right, now I have actually shifted to the midground, and I'm putting in the illusion of sagebrush in the distant hills. And I don't have to mix any new colors. I've already mixed everything I need for the foreground sagebrush, but I will be careful not to go too dark and try to keep the colors a little more muted. So, but I'm just using some of the same colors that I've already used on the foreground sagebrush. And to paint these sagebrush, I'm still using the same round brush that I was using before on the foreground. But I am being careful to not load it as heavy because I don't want as much paint going down. I'm also trying to use more towards the front end of the brush, not completely using the point, although sometimes I do speckle in some sagebrush around the clumps I'm building with the point. But I'm kind of using the point some and also laying it not as broadly as I was on the foreground, but I want to create the broken illusion of sagebrush there. Working on the sagebrush, I saw an opportunity to use some of the colors I'd mixed up to work on these trees a little bit that I put in the last video. I'm adding a little lighter color to the sunny side of those trees to give it some more contour and depth and reality to those trees. And then I pulled out my rigger brush and I'm adding some limbs into those new trees I put in using kind of a brownish color that I mixed up to use with the sagebrush. And then I didn't feel like my tree trunks were light enough on the sunny side, so I'm using that rigger brush and I threw in a little titanium white to lighten up the little brown that I had mixed up for the sagebrush trunk. And now I'm putting in some lighter shading on the sides of those trees. Difficult to see on the video because it's very subtle, but I think I can see where it added some roundness to the tree trunks. And I use that same color and touch up the original tree trunks so that they have synergy between them, so that they all have the same speckle of color along that edge. I want to tie them all together and make them feel like they're one clump of trees, similar trees. And using that same color, I add a few little branches coming up lower on the trees, and again, giving it some variety to the trees I'm making. And those little extra branches coming up just add just a little touch, a nuance to the painting, into that clump of trees. It's those little details that do matter. Even though I'm not trying to be ultra realistic, that type of little detail doesn't take away from the looseness of your painting, but it does add some, I don't know, something in your mind that just feels good about it. Don't allow your quest for a loose painting to derail your efforts to create some detail. Even loose paintings have solid edges and detail. It's just a matter of how you use them and where you use them in order to create a visually appealing, eye-catching experience for the viewer. Now, after fixing up those trees, I shift back to the midground, and I start with a patch of bushes in the midground here. They're going to be a little more green with some yellows in it, although muted because they are midground. But I don't You just don't have sagebrush only growing out there. You're going to have trees growing out in these flats. You're going to have sagebrush growing out in these flats, but you're also going to have bushes that grow up out in these flats with greenery on them. And so that's what I'm putting in here, a pretty large patch of it. I am using the similar technique and the same brush that I used on the painting so far for the sagebrush. And you can see it's slightly greenish hue here, although a little bit dark. Then I'm going to come in with some lighter colors on top of it. And this type of bushes and shrubbery on the foothills, is not uncommon. So I get to add that in. And it also breaks that road up a little bit. I'm going to have those bushes kind of cut across the road. And that breaks up that road a little bit from just one solid long line and creates a diagonal going the opposite direction, which the eye will pick up on and will break up any monotony that I might have created. I've also tried to make the angle of those bushes slightly different than the angles I already have in the midground. It's a little steeper than the hill that's above it. I'm not just putting in random details. I have reasons for why I'm putting the things I'm putting in. So you need to think about the angles, and you don't want every angle in your painting to be the same. That's unnatural. That's not the way reality works in a landscape. So I've changed the angle. I talked about cutting across that road. That road was very long and straight, and I needed to break it up a little bit. So I'm putting these bushes in to break that up and cause a breakage. So when you begin to follow that road, you may, with your eye, you may decide to go up or down those bushes, and it kind of points up to the trees above it and to the left. It's an indicator to push your eye up into those trees. It also, that brush pushes your eye down towards the fence line again, so it creates paths for your eye to travel, and that's important when you're doing a landscape. And I can't emphasize this enough. When you're doing a really large one, you have to be really aware. Your composition can really kill your painting if you don't think about all these types of things. So it's not just randomly sticking this stuff in. It's thinking about the purpose and what it does for your painting. It brings some variety to the more focal area of this painting at the end of this main road, and it breaks things up. It creates new angles and brings in colors to break up the background and bring some life and vitality to it. I've pulled out my rigger brush again, and now you can start to see it getting a little lighter across the dark patches. I'm actually bringing in some cadmium yellow light and mixing it in with the darker green color to lighten that up and give me a little flash of sunlight glistening off these bushes and such. Not that there's a ton of sunlight here, but I do want to create some of the ambiance of sunlight. I am now using a very small synthetic flat to put some shadows, some dark around the edges of the brush. And I'm seeing opportunities also maybe to put some shadow behind some of those trees up above it, create a little more shadow and depth to it. Shadow is important in your landscapings. A landscape without shadows just is missing so much, and it might look good, but something will feel off if you just don't have enough shadows in your landscapings. And in these Idaho foothills, shadows can be difficult because they are so wide open and there's not a lot of things out there to create big shadows, unless you're on the dark side of the mountain or the hill, where the sun's cutting across. But so you have to look for opportunities to create shadows. So that's what I'm doing here, just putting a little darkness around the edges of this where to get a little shadow in there. And on the topic of sunlight, I have a pretty big video coming up where I redo the sky And it really, I think, really makes this painting pop when I redo that sky. And you'll see what I'm talking about, and I'll give me more opportunities when I do that to play with the sunlight and shadows. So that'll be coming up in the next video. I then took some of that shadow color and broke up the brush a little bit to put some darker patches in the brush. And then I take that same dark shadowy color and go back to that first distant sagebrush patch I put in, and I want to add some darker colors into that to create, again, more depth, shadow, shape to it. Must be careful not to get too dark. I don't want the darks in my midground to be as dark as my darks in the foreground. The further back you go, the lighter your darkest darks get in those areas. So you can create reality with these darker colors, and it's important to have them. Just be careful of the values. As you fade away, your darks get lighter and your lights get less vibrant. So keep that in mind. I'm taking the opportunity with this shadowy dark color to add some shadows to the trees I've already put in the distance. Again, shadows are important. Even the distant shadows, a little cut of shadow behind those trees just adds a little bit of reality to it. And you can see I'm moving about my painting, shifting what I'm focusing on, putting in a little bit of work, stepping back, looking, letting a spot settle, and then I go and work on another spot I see, scanning the whole painting, seeing the synergy of my colors and brush strokes. I want to make sure everything fits into the environment in which I'm painting. So great opportunity to touch up some other things while I'm working on these sagebrush. Now, using a lightened up color, I put a little titanium white in my shadowy color. I'm actually painting in some very light hints of fence posts, as if the fence post is still running alongside the road, using a rigger brush. I don't want to make these too dark or they'll pop out too much, but the little lines kind of show up, and it adds a little variety and reality to it. I could have got away without doing the fence posts, but I thought the fence posts here would tie it into the foreground a little better. And again, it's a very large painting. I want the viewer to spend a lot of time looking at it, and these little subtle details can help do that, even though they're still loose and simple. Also, these fence posts reinforce the illusion of perspective and distance. Just the scale of them is so much smaller and they're so pale and light. Anything you can do to add to the perspective of distance in your paintings it can be very valuable. So you need to consider those. Don't overwork things, of course, but this is very subtle and can add to that perspective view. And I go to the other side of the road and add in fence posts there. Some of them don't show up as well, but that's okay. You don't need them to all show up the same. They can fade in and out, but they're against the backdrop of the road sometimes, and so you lose some of them. But they're there when you get up close and you're looking at it in person. Very subtle. I want to put this section of video into a fast forward so you can see me work on some more sagebrush here, using the same techniques I've already used. This sagebrush will also help to cut up that road a little bit and make it feel more part of the landscape. Break the road a little bit with sagebrush coming up across it, and also reinforce the illusion that we're on a downward sloping hill. You want to reinforce perspective and contour with this type of addition to the painting. So, and it also points again down towards the road. It gives you a path. So you follow the road down, and then you can follow that sagebrush up into the hillside up to the road. Again, I'm using the same colors that I've used for the other sagebrush. I'm putting in dark colors and light colors and breaking up the pattern, creating that illusion of sagebrush running down the hill from the road. I'm making this patch a little thicker than the other patches of sagebrush I've put in, and thicker in depth-wise compared to the brush above it. Again, I want to create variety. I don't want to copy the same pattern everywhere else. So You gotta keep that kind of thing in mind. You don't want to duplicate patterns over and over again. It makes your paintings come out looking stiff. And with that sagebrush out of the way, I'm going to take this opportunity to put a little more shadow underneath this far trees I have over here. Using that same shadow color, it just adds a little pop to that clump of trees, pine trees up there, the little darkness there. And I'm being a little bold with my darker colors here in the midground than I was earlier. I'm using it to add a little pop to it and add some variety and some drama to the midground area. The midground is a little dull, and I don't mean color-wise, I just mean visually. It's just a little dull and flat. And so I need to take some risks with that to add color. And I do go back, take opportunities as I step back and look to repaint over some of the areas. And typically that's going to be bringing in darker colors. And again, I got to be careful though. I don't want these darks to interfere with the darks that are in the foreground, but I did leave myself a little bit of space for that. Upon further review, stepping back and looking at it a bit, I decided I need to do some more work on this most prominent sagebrush here at the end of this road. And I decided I need to put sagebrush above the road as well, as if the road was cut through some sagebrush clumps that was already there. So I need to do that. And so I'll step in that in a minute. I'm adding some more dark colors in here into the sagebrush, and also taking an opportunity to add some more darks into my brush pocket that's above it there I'm working on. And I may have to go in, I'm expecting to go in and work on that lower sagebrush clump a little more after this video. As I look at it, it seems like there's just too many solid lines in there. The dark is just more of a solid line. And I'm adding some dark also again to those trees, that clump of trees that's up there. Again, that dark really I think makes it stand out and makes it pop a little bit. Not that you want your midground to be overly aggressive, but it's got to carry some weight here. Because this is such a large painting, it has to carry its weight. It has to do its job. So, and the best way to do that is bring in some darker colors. I'm also going to introduce in a later video some higher chroma, and I'll talk about that there as well, why I would bring in higher chroma into the midground, but it's going to make sense when I do it. So continuing to add some dark colors and some light colors into my sagebrush and brush and things, shaping them out a little bit. I'll probably go back in, like I said earlier, and touch up this pocket of sagebrush down here. I struggled a little bit with it compared to the other ones. Especially, I like that brush pocket there, that green one. That looks nice. It's got good color and good contrast. But this sagebrush is not so good. But that's part of painting. You do it and you go back and you fix it when you notice the problem. So I'll be working on that. I'm adding in some lightened up burnt sienna here and there around. These Idaho hills have patches of that burnt sienna colored like gravelly rock that's on the ground, and it's not unusual at all. So I'm adding some of that in here to break up the color a little bit and also create a line that points up higher to the trees above it there. I'm going to put some of that in around this sagebrush down here as well. Again, it adds some variety to the painting, and it's a subtle color. I've thinned it down a little bit. I believe either a little bit of yellow Naples, I think, is what I use to soften it up a little. This is really the part of the painting where your artistic eye and the rules of composition and the rules of values and chroma really have to all come together in order to figure out what I'm going to do with this painting. It would be really easy to stop either too soon or too late. If I'm not careful and I stop too soon, well, then my midground is flat and it almost feels like a separate painting than the foreground. If I overwork the midground, then I start losing perspective and my chromas get off and my values get off and I lose the illusion of depth that I'm after. So it takes a keen eye and remembering all the rules when you get to this point of a painting. Now here I am taking a risk. I'm bringing this sagebrush above the road and it's touching the sagebrush in the foreground. And I may have to really look at this later and see if I've got enough contrast and color or value so you can see the difference between the foreground sagebrush and the background sagebrush. That'll be important to maintain my illusion of depth there. But that's part of painting. I will look at it over the next few days as I work on some other items and then decide what I need to do to create that separation and such. And I work a little bit on the sagebrush I just put in the front foreground too, to help maybe with some contrast, put in some lighter colors. And that may be what I will do, is put in some brighter, higher chroma, lighter colors on this sagebrush up front and dull down the sagebrush in the back a little bit. Or I can always refocus and reshift that sagebrush in the back. I'll have to see. I got to strike that balance. And it may be okay if I lose the distant sagebrush into the foreground sagebrush a little bit to create kind of a I don't know, subtle lost edge that's not really a lost edge type effect. I also take some of the lighter colors that I've created, some of the sagebrush colors, and I'm going to put some highlights here and there in the midground. And here I'm going in and putting a really distant sagebrush clumps out there. I got to keep those lighter and not overdo the darks because they are so far away. But again, it breaks up that midground area and creates more depth and contour because I got that little different color back there to do that. And the sagebrush works well for that type of illusion. This is a very natural occurrence, clumps of and big patches of sagebrush out there. You can see, whole hillsides just covered in sagebrush. And then you get wildfires that come through and burn down all the sagebrush, and then you're left with the grasses and the random clumps of sagebrush or random little sagebrush here or there. And so a lot of wildfires that just kind of burn off the grasses and the sagebrush. That creates a lot of opportunity to break up your background in this kind of painting. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. In the next one, I think I'm going to be working on the sky, and that's really going to make things pop, I think. So until then, this is the Big Toad, and I am out.